few years ago, I had the privilege of being engaged, we call it Heads Up, and I went into most of the inner cities of America, essentially black churches, and taught kids, some of them American Indians and Hispanic and so forth, how to read, and it was just astounding. We did a phonics-based program and saw little children just begin to read with great fluency and to come away with a vocabulary of the several thousand words. It was really very nice. But American education, we found at the same time, functionally literacy was rife. People were getting through, they'd go from the third grade on up and they couldn't read properly. They were dysfunctional. So there's a mess. And so you say, what's wrong with American education? I could write a whole book about that, and our next guest has done just that, Ron Paul. Experts, parents, teachers, even kids could agree on many problems, but what about some solutions? So Ron Paul, who was noted for running for president, has written about the plan. And what does he say? Let's ask him right now.
While your neighborhood school may be thriving, there's grave concern about American public education as a whole. ACT, the college testing organization, recently found that less than 1/4 of U.S. high school students meet college-ready standards in their core subjects. An international assessment found U.S. 15-year-olds rank 17th in science and 25th in math compared to other industrialized countries. And the Council on Foreign Relations has warned that such failure puts the United States' future economic prosperity, global position, and physical safety at risk. Enter former presidential candidate, congressman, and New York Times bestseller Ron Paul, out with a new book, The School Revolution. Paul's prescription for our schools: transfer authority back to parents, support homeschooling, and apply free market principles to the education system.
Ron Paul's here with us, and he scored really well as he was running for president. Ron, good to have you with us, the School Revolution. Could I ask you a question before we start talking about schools, please?
Sure, Pat. Nice to be with you again.
All right, listen. They're facing this government shutdown, the debt ceiling. What do you say about that? Are you concerned about the crisis we're coming into?
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, the shutdown could be very, very damaging and very harmful. But, you know, it's compared to what? I think, though, that if we don't cut back and get control of things, we're going to have a breakdown. You know, the spending issue in Washington is similar to what Bernanke is facing. You know, they pretend they want to cut back a little bit, but the pain of cutting back is so politically damaging because somebody will feel the pain. And that's what this shutdown is all about. But I worry a lot more about the breakdown. And when I think about a breakdown, I think of what's happening right now in Detroit. And I know you know the monetary policy issue and what happens when we keep spending. And it can be very, very damaging. And I heard you mentioning about the breakdown of the dollar. I agree with you totally on that. And that should be our biggest concern. So I see this as a battle. I don't think they're going to shut down the government. They always go up to the 11th hour, the last minute, and then they come through. I may be wrong on that, but I think it's all politicking because basically, you know, I think the leadership in both parties aren't that far apart. They endorse the same foreign policy, the same policy and money with the Federal Reserve, and they both believe in deficits. So they do have their special interests to deal with, and they want to, you know, appeal to their base, and they like the power. But basically, on the major issues, they agree. That's why I think there won't be a shutdown, but they ought to worry about the breakdown of the system, which I'm afraid is coming.
With you on that one. Well, let's talk about education. What do you want to do with it? That's clearly broken down now. What's your solution?
Well, what I do, I talk about the breakdown of education and the need to do something, but I don't think there's going to be a top-down reform. I don't think you can go to Washington and, you know, tinker around with No Child Left Behind and you and I get the right to textbooks and all these kind of things that reforming the system. I sort of say, well, that's going to have to resolve itself, but I want people to have the right to opt out of the system. And I'm sure you remember in the 1980s, the big fights on whether we were even allowed to do it. But the principle was set. I'm afraid someday they might attack it again, but just allow some people to get out and get their education. And my proposal is to, contribute to the homeschooling movement, which proves that they can overcome all these obstacles. But I think basically the thrust has to be so basic, and that is, what should the role of government be? And I think our school systems for more than 150 years has gradually accepted the notion of centralized planning, and that the role of government ought to be, control of the economy, endorse the economic monetary system, the Federal Reserve, intervention overseas, the drug wars, all these things, they're conditioned to support that. And what I want to do is offer it from a different perspective, and I know you're aware of the perspective that Leonard Read proposed, at the Fee Foundation years ago, and that's called the freedom philosophy. And that is what is truly American. That's what truly conforms with the Constitution. So I want a schooling based on those principles where people can defend these ideas and not be embarrassed. I think one of the reasons we have lost so much over the years has been that libertarians and conservatives and constitutionalists have never been able to show that we care about people, that we are humanitarians. The liberal left say, we're the only ones who care. We're going to take care of everybody, and we're going to redistribute the wealth, and everybody's going to be happy. But now it's failing. But we have to show that there is an option. For me, it's in the freedom movement. And there, if you really care about people, and you care about the dwindling middle class and the enrichment of the 1%, you need to look at the freedom philosophy. And that is my plan to do that in homeschooling.
Ron, don't the so-called progressives or whatever, don't they really want education to indoctrinate children? It's not just a question of educating. They want to indoctrinate them in their philosophy, don't they?
I think that's the whole purpose. It's indoctrination, it's compulsory, it's conformity, destroy creativity, can destroy individuality, and they don't want kids to be curious, so they have to conform and mold it, and then they are obedient to the state, and then we allow our governments to grow, and then all of a sudden we have NSA, runaway with invasion of our privacy. We have runaway militarism around the world. We have runaway spending and runaway printing of money, but they condition the people to say, oh, the government knows best. They'll take care of it. But Pat, really what I think is happening now is that's being challenged. I think it's being challenged in Washington to a degree, but I think the country is challenging this, and they're asking questions. Never before in the 100-year history of the Fed have there's been so many questioning about the efficiency of the Federal Reserve. I think there's some encouraging signs out there, and I go to a lot of the college campuses. I find that the movement is great in our direction, even though we face a lot of danger in the short term, and who knows what will happen in the short term. But I believe that the next generation will have, the ability to rebuild this, and I think that's what I want the homeschooling movement to do to contribute to that rebuilding.
Well, you're a great voice of reason. We appreciate this. Ladies and gentlemen, this book is called The School Revolution. Ron Paul, he's a best-selling author, and you can get this wherever books are sold. We appreciate his voice. And Ron, I don't know if you remember, about 40 years ago, 30 years ago, you and I shared a room in Arden House up in Columbia. You remember that we were at a hard money conference up there?
Right.
And you were a doctor. You were practicing medicine, as I recall, and I was a fledgling whatever. So.
Yeah, but I was very impressed with that, because I knew you came not to be the grandiose speaker or anything like that. You told me you honestly came to learn, and I thought that was very impressive. So that gave you a very good impression on me.
Well, it was a great conference. I enjoyed it, but it's good to see you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat.
My early days,
the voice of reason.
The voice of reason. Okay,
Yes.
Homeschool. He's right. He's right. Mm-hmm. But I tell you, it's kind of like that voice, one crying in the wilderness. It's not too many people heeded him, but he had a real strong following. They in this presidential thing, but he couldn't get up beyond a certain level.
Well, maybe as things economically spiral a little,
they'll come toward him.